They mocked him in the middle of the diner, laughed as they dumped a plate of food over his head, while customers watched, smirking, thinking he was nothing more than a broken man limping through life. No one knew the truth. No one knew the quiet stranger they humiliated was a former Navy SEAL, a man who had survived deserts, storms, and missions the world would never hear about. And beside him, lying silently under the table, was Ranger, the war-trained German shepherd who never forgot how to protect the man who saved him. What happened next would flip that entire diner upside down, revealing a past forged in fire, a loyalty stronger than fear, and a moment of reckoning none of them saw coming. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of courage, redemption, and the miracles that rise when the quietest person in the room finally stands. Winter pressed over Snowridge like a white curtain pulled across the world, muffling sound and softening everything except the cold. Snow drifted against the worn wooden steps of Frostbite Diner, the roadside cafe where Ethan Walker now worked, moving slowly, deliberately, on a leg that no longer obeyed him as faithfully as it once had. Ethan, in his mid-40s, had a square jaw roughened by a permanent shadow of beard, the kind that comes not from carelessness, but from a man who has long stopped caring about mirrors. His dark blonde hair, streaked with early gray, hinted at years lived too intensely, and his eyes, icy blue and distant, often seemed to be watching a memory only he could see. Beneath his thick winter jacket, his frame remained strong, a remnant of the Navy SEAL he had once been, though the slight heaviness in his shoulders betrayed an exhaustion older than his age. Ranger, the German shepherd who had followed Ethan through deserts, mountains, and the dust-filled silence of foreign nights, walked beside him with a soldier's posture. 7 years old, large and broad-chested, with a black and tan coat thick for winter, Ranger carried himself with the quiet pride of a veteran. His amber eyes flickered with intelligence and a protectiveness that hadn't dimmed even after retirement. The dog was more than a companion. He was the echo of Ethan's past, and sometimes the only reminder that the man he used to be hadn't vanished entirely. Inside Frostbite Diner, warmth seeped from the old radiators along the walls. The air smelled of frying bacon, wood polish, and the cinnamon rolls that Sarah kept insisting would fix any broken heart. Sarah, the owner, was a tall, willow-thin woman in her early 60s with short silver hair that curled lightly at her temples. Her skin was weathered from decades of Montana winters, but her green eyes sparkled with both sharp wit and motherly patience. She had taken Ethan in without questions, offering him work when he had nowhere else to go. She treated him with a mixture of respect and worry, sensing the quiet battlefield inside him, though she never said so out loud. Ethan appreciated that. Words were heavy for him now, and Sarah never made him carry more than he could bear. The morning passed in the slow rhythm of a small-town winter. Locals shuffled in with snow still clinging to their boots, their cheeks red from the wind. Ethan moved between tables, balancing plates with practiced precision, the subtle limp in his gait noticeable only when he grew tired. Ranger lay under the counter, head resting on his paws, ears perked. Not sleeping, never fully at ease, as if always waiting for the next danger that might require him. When the bell above the diner door jingled sharply, Ranger lifted his head before Ethan even turned. Tyler Hale entered with the confidence of someone who believed the world was made to entertain him. He was 19, tall but lanky, with a mop of brown hair he just had to stay, constantly pushed back and eyes that held more mischief than malice, but enough of the latter to cause trouble. His leather jacket was 2 sizes too big, a hand-me-down he wore like a badge of rebellion. Tyler had spent most of his life convincing himself he was feared, but deep down, he was simply afraid. Afraid of being invisible, of being ordinary, of never being more than that kid from Snowridge who never left. And so he picked targets he thought safe. Ethan Walker, limping ex-soldier, seemed safe. "Morning, hero," Tyler drawled, sliding into a booth like he owned the place. "Still hobbling around? Thought guys like you retired to Florida." Sarah shot him a glare so sharp it could cut ice, but she didn't interfere. Ethan didn't respond. He rarely responded. Instead, he set a steaming mug of coffee on the table, his expression unreadable. Tyler grinned wider, sensing opportunity. "Heard your daughter's back in town," he continued. "What's she now, 18? Bet she's not too proud of this, huh?" He waved a hand vaguely at Ethan's apron, the limp, the life that didn't look like glory. Ethan's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. Words were dangerous things. He knew that better than most. Ranger's ears tilted back, his gaze narrowing at Tyler with the silent warning of a seasoned guardian. Tyler ignored it. He always ignored the warning signs in life. Outside, the wind howled, sweeping drifts of snow across the windows like pale ghosts. Inside, Ethan fought a familiar tightening in his chest. Mia, his daughter, his bright, stubborn girl who once believed her father could outrun storms but now barely looked at him. She had returned to town a month earlier, and the distance between them felt larger than the Montana sky. Ethan thought of her often, too often, and every memory pricked him like ice under the skin. He remembered her as a child holding Ranger's oversized paw, giggling at the way he tolerated her braiding flowers into his fur. That girl seemed so far away now, replaced by an 18-year-old who carried anger like armor, anger he had earned, anger he wished he could fix. The diner door jingled again, and Ethan's breath caught before he even turned. Mia stepped inside. She was tall like her mother, slender but athletic, with long dark chestnut hair that escaped her beanie in soft waves. Her skin was smooth and pale, flushed slightly from the cold, and her brown eyes, deep, expressive, so much like they used to be, were now guarded. She hesitated at the entrance, scanning the room, before her gaze landed on Ethan. For a second, something wavered in her expression. Uncertainty, longing, hurt. Then she blinked it away. "Hey," she said flatly, brushing snow from her jacket. Just one word, yet it carried 1,000 unspoken things. Ethan swallowed. "Hey." Mia slid into a booth near the window. Ranger immediately stood and trotted toward her, tail low but hopeful. He nudged her hand, gently. Mia's lips twitched, not a smile, but something close. Then she pulled her hand back. "Not now, boy." Tyler snorted loudly, making sure everyone heard. "Even the dog gets rejected. Rough day for the Walker family." Sarah slammed a tray onto the counter so hard Tyler jumped. "Tyler Hale, one more word and you're shoveling snow out back for the rest of winter." Tyler smirked, but quieted. Mia stared out the window, her breath fogging the glass, her thoughts a storm as tangled as the one outside. Ethan stood at the counter trying to find words that didn't feel heavy or wrong, words that might soften the distance. But in the end, he said nothing. Snow kept falling. Ranger laid down between them, the silent guardian who understood what both father and daughter couldn't say. And so began the morning in Snowridge, cold, fragile, and waiting. The night wind slipped through the cracks of Snowridge like a rumor, whistling along the eaves of Frostbite Diner and rattling the windows, as if the winter itself wanted to come in and listen. Inside, the lights were soft and yellow, pooling over scratched tabletops and chrome edges that had seen better decades. Ethan Walker wiped down the same spot on the counter for the third time, not because it was dirty, but because his hands needed something to do. In the glass reflection, he caught his own face, square, tired, with that rough stubble and those pale blue eyes that always seemed a little lost when he wasn't focused on a task. He looked away before the man in the reflection could say something he didn't want to hear. Ranger lay at his feet, stretched out on the worn mat behind the counter, his thick black and tan coat still dusted with snow from their walk-in. At 7 years old, the German Shepherd had a bulk and solidity that made most people think twice before getting too close, but his eyes were full of an old, quiet gentleness. He watched the door, ears flicking every time the wind howled. Ethan could sense the dog's restlessness, the way the old instincts still stirred whenever something felt off. Tonight felt off. Sarah moved between the tables with the practical grace of a woman who had spent her whole life on her feet. Her tall, lean frame was wrapped in a faded maroon sweater, her silver hair pulled back with a simple clip. The lines around her green eyes deepened when she glanced at the clock. "She's late," Sarah muttered under her breath, more to herself than anyone, but Ethan heard it anyway. The words pricked him, not because they were critical, but because they carried concern, something he didn't feel he deserved. "Traffic," he said quietly, even though he knew there wasn't any real traffic in Snowridge, not in this weather, not ever. Sarah just sighed, wiped her hands on her apron, and gave him a look that was half sympathy, half command. "Don't start making excuses for her, Ethan. Let the girl be late. You're the one showing up." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached down and let his fingers brush Ranger's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the thick fur, the steady heartbeat under his hand. The dog turned his head and licked Ethan's fingers once, a small gesture that said more than any human pep talk. The bell above the door finally chimed. Cold air rushed in along with Mia. She stepped inside, brushing snow from her dark chestnut hair, her cheeks tinged pink from the wind. At 18, she had the kind of presence that pulled attention without her trying, tall and slender, with a posture that said she was trying hard not to care about anything, and eyes that betrayed just how much she actually did. Her brown gaze swept the diner before landing on Ethan, pausing for half a heartbeat, then drifting away as if looking at him for too long burned. "You're late," Sarah said, but her tone softened around the edges. Mia offered a tight half smile. "Bus was slow." It wasn't. Everyone knew it wasn't, but nobody argued. Ethan felt the familiar awkwardness rise up, a clumsy giant inside his chest. He wanted to say he was glad she came, that he'd been thinking about this all day, that he'd stayed an extra hour on shift just so he could be here when she walked in. Instead, he cleared his throat and nodded toward a booth by the window. "I saved your spot." Mia glanced at the booth, then at him. "It's not my spot," she said, but she went to sit there anyway. The vinyl seat gave a soft squeak under her weight. Ranger stood and patted over, his claws clicking lightly against the floor. He approached her slowly, head lowered, tail giving a tentative wag. He nudged his muzzle against her hand, the same way he had when she was 10 years old and crying over a math test, or 13 and pretending not to cry when Ethan left on another deployment. Back then, she would bury her face in his fur and whisper secrets into his ears. Now, she stiffened. Her fingers twitched, like they remembered that comfort and wanted to reach for it, but the rest of her refused. "Not now, Ranger," she murmured, pulling her hand away. The dog's ears dipped, his eyes softening with something like hurt, though he didn't understand the why of it. He simply lay down beside the booth instead, placing himself between Mia and the rest of the world, just as he always had. Ethan felt the rejection land somewhere deep in his chest, even though it wasn't aimed at him directly. Or maybe it was. Maybe everything was. He walked over to the booth, his limp more pronounced after the long day. Every step reminded him of the night it all changed. Shouting, gunfire, the burning smell of sand and metal. Ranger's bark cutting through chaos as pain flared white-hot in his leg. He'd told himself he went because it was his duty, because they needed him, because he couldn't live with himself if he stayed home while others bled. But as he stopped beside Mia's table, he wondered if that conviction meant anything to the girl who had watched him leave one too many times. "What do you feel like eating?" he asked, resting a hand on the back of the booth to steady himself. His voice came out rougher than he intended, like gravel under tires. "I'm not hungry," Mia said, staring out the window at the snow piling up against the glass. Her reflection floated there, soft, blurred, unreachable. "Your mom wanted me to make sure you had dinner," Ethan said carefully, as if each word might crack the fragile surface between them. In his mind, he saw Laura, Mia's mother, with her tired smile and warm brown eyes, the way she used to stand at the sink late at night, hands in soapy water, pretending everything was fine while the bills stacked up and the news talked about another deployment. "Mom wants a lot of things," Mia replied, bitterness slicing clean through the air. "Doesn't mean she gets them." Ethan swallowed. "You came," he said. "That means something." She finally turned to look at him, and the pain in her eyes made him want to sit down from the force of it. "Yeah," she said quietly. "It means I still feel guilty when I say no." He had no answer for that. Sarah, hovering at the counter, sensed the shift in the atmosphere. She moved in with the ease of someone who'd been patching emotional wounds in this diner long before Ethan ever arrived. "How about I bring you some soup, honey?" she asked, her voice brisk but kind. "On the house, and a grilled cheese. No one argues with grilled cheese in this weather." Mia hesitated, then gave a small shrug. "Fine." It wasn't agreement. It was surrender. Sarah took it anyway. As she walked away, she muttered, "2 broken walkers and a dog. I should start charging for therapy instead of food." Tyler appeared just as the soup arrived, the bell over the door jingling in that particular way that made Ethan's shoulders tense. Tyler Hale shook snow from his too large leather jacket and sauntered inside like the diner was a stage and he was the lead actor. His lanky frame slouched, but his chin tilted up, trying to carve dominance out of insecurity. He spotted Ethan and Mia immediately, and a grin spread across his face, sharp, careless, hungry for attention. "Evening, folks," he announced, walking straight toward their booth instead of taking an empty seat like a normal customer. "Family dinner, huh? Cute." Mia stiffened. Ranger's ears flattened, his body growing still. Ethan met Tyler's eyes, his own expression unreadable. "Take a seat, Tyler," Ethan said. "Order something or head out. Don't start." Tyler laughed, holding his hands up in mock surrender. "Relax, Walker. Just saying hi. Big night, isn't it? Daughter's back in town, old war dog at your feet, working the late shift at the diner. Real American hero moment." His tone made the word hero sound like an insult. Mia stared at her soup, cheeks flushing. It was the kind of flush that came from embarrassment rather than warmth. "Tyler, go sit down," she murmured, not quite looking at him. "Why?" he asked, leaning an elbow on the back of the booth. "I'm just talking. Everyone in town knows the story anyway. You know, brave Navy SEAL dad goes off to save the world, leaves the family scraping by, comes back with a limp and a dog, but no plan. That about right?" Ethan's hands curled into fists. He could feel the old training thrumming in his muscles, the instinct to shut down a threat fast and hard. But this wasn't a battlefield, and Tyler, infuriating as he was just a kid drowning in his own smallness. Taking that bait would just prove every fear Mia already had about him. He forced his fingers to unclench. Ranger let out a low, warning rumble, chest vibrating against the floor. Tyler glanced down with a smirk, though there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. "What, the dog gonna bite me now?" he said. "He only bites when he has to," Ethan replied, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Don't give him a reason." Mia looked between them, anger and shame battling across her face. "Stop," she snapped suddenly, more to Ethan than to Tyler. "Just stop, both of you." Her voice shook. "I didn't come here to watch you play soldier in a diner, Dad. I came because Mom asked me to. That's it." The words landed like blows. Ethan felt each one, a physical impact behind his ribs. He tried to breathe through it, but the guilt was a living thing inside him, whispering that she was right, that choosing duty had cost him more than scars and a limp. It had cost him his daughter's trust. Tyler, sensing the tension reach its peak, gave a low whistle. "Yikes. Awkward," he said. "Well, I'll leave you to your happy reunion." He stepped back, but not before tossing one last jab over his shoulder. "Careful though, Mia. Heroes have a way of leaving when things get hard. Just ask your mom." Ranger surged up slightly, another growl rumbling out, but Ethan laid a hand on the dog's back. He didn't move, didn't shout, didn't throw Tyler out into the snow, even though a part of him burned to do exactly that. He just stood there, swallowing words he didn't know how to shape, while Mia's expression closed off like a door slamming shut. "I'm done," she said quietly, pushing the bowl of soup away. She rose from the booth, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. "Thanks for dinner. Tell Mom I came." Ethan wanted to reach out, to catch her wrist, to say something that might undo even a fraction of the damage, but his hand stayed at his side. He watched as she walked past him, past Ranger, past the life he had tried to rebuild, and out into the cold. Ranger took a step after her, then stopped, looking back at Ethan as if waiting for a command that never came. Outside, the wind howled louder. Inside, beneath the warm lights of the diner, the space between father and daughter stretched wider than ever. Another fracture in a family already held together by threads. The blizzard came down over Snowridge like the sky had cracked open, spilling white noise across the town until the world outside Frostbite Diner looked more like a fading memory than a street. Snow blew sideways, the wind clawing at the windows with icy fingers, making the glass shiver every time a stronger gust hit. Inside, the diner was a small island of warmth and yellow light, the hum of the old heater and the clink of silverware trying their best to drown out the storm's low roar. Ethan Walker felt the pressure of the weather in his bones, the same way he used to feel the tension before a mission. An ache at the base of his skull, a tightening across his shoulders. His leg throbbed softly beneath the faded denim of his jeans, the old injury awakened by the cold, but it wasn't the physical pain that bothered him most. It was the way bad weather always seemed to drag up old ghosts, sandstorms in foreign deserts, rotor blades beating through dusty air, the metallic taste of adrenaline. He wiped down the counter again, though it was already clean, and let his gaze drift across the diner. Ranger lay near the entrance, stretched out but far from relaxed, his thick black and tan coat ruffled slightly where the air seeped in under the door. At 7 years old, he carried himself with the composed readiness of a seasoned soldier. His amber eyes tracked every movement inside and out, ears twitching at each howl of the wind. To most people, he was just a big German shepherd, but Ethan knew better. Ranger was an early warning system, a shield, and a piece of Ethan's own instincts, given 4 legs and teeth. If something was coming, Ranger would feel it first. Mia sat in a corner booth, the one near the window where the outside world appeared only as swirling white and ghostly, shifting shadows. She had her phone in her hand, but wasn't really looking at it, just scrolling aimlessly, letting the blue light wash over her face. Her long, dark chestnut hair fell over one shoulder, still a little damp from the snow, and her brown eyes had that distant look again, like she was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere warmer, quieter, far away from this small town, this diner, this complicated man who happened to be her father. At 18, she was technically an adult, but right now she felt like a child trapped between past and future, anger and guilt, love and disappointment. She could feel Ethan's eyes on her from time to time, that hesitant, searching gaze that always made her chest tighten. Part of her wanted him to stop looking at her like that, like he was trying to memorize her face before she vanished. Another part, a quieter, softer part she refused to admit existed, clung to the attention like a life raft. Sarah moved through the diner with the patient efficiency of someone who'd survived more winters and more broken people than she could count. Her tall, lean frame seemed unbothered by the cold drafts, her silver hair pinned back neatly, despite the chaos outside. Her green eyes, though, kept flicking to the windows, then to the door, then to Mia and Ethan, as if she were waiting for something to snap. She'd seen it before. Storms outside and storms inside had a way of colliding. At one table near the middle, a trucker with a thick beard and a heavy canvas jacket, just another passing stranger whose name no one really caught, cupped his coffee with rough hands and stared at the weather like it was a personal enemy. A young couple in the back, bundled in scarves and puffy coats, laughed too loudly, trying to pretend the storm was just an interesting backdrop and not a threat. But underneath the casual conversation, the entire diner felt like it was holding its breath. The door crashed open with a bang that made even the trucker flinch. Cold air knifed into the diner, sending napkins fluttering and making the lights flicker for half a second. Ranger was on his feet before the bell could even finish jingling, his body tense, ears forward. A man stepped inside, slamming the door shut behind him. He wore a heavy black parka dusted with snow, the hood pulled up, and a dark ski mask that covered everything except his eyes. Those eyes were restless, darting, wide fever bright. He moved with the jittery energy of someone being chased by invisible wolves. One gloved hand clutched at something under his coat, fingers twitching. Ethan didn't need to see the shape to know what it was. He felt the air change, felt the way the other patrons fell silent, fear rippling out in a wave. Sarah froze for the smallest fraction of a second, then slowly set the coffee pot she'd been holding back onto the warmer. Her face didn't change much. A lifetime of dealing with trouble had taught her that panicking never helped. But her eyes sharpened, and her posture shifted from casual to ready. "Evening," she said, voice steady though the word tasted wrong in the air. "Hell of a storm out there." The man's gaze flicked to her, then to the trucker, the couple, the counter, the cash register. His breathing was too fast, the kind that fogged the air in front of him in frantic bursts. Ethan cataloged every detail automatically, the slight tremor in the shoulders, the uneven weight distribution in the feet, the dilated pupils. Fear, adrenaline, maybe drugs, not a trained killer, something else, something messier. Then the man pulled the gun. It came out in a clumsy, hurried motion, a black handgun that shook in his grasp. The young couple gasped, the woman's hand flying to her mouth. The trucker pushed his chair back, knuckles whitening around the edge of the table. Mia's phone slipped from her fingers and hit the tabletop with a dull clack. Time seemed to constrict around that single movement, the world narrowing to the barrel of the weapon and the way it swept across the room. "Nobody move!" the man shouted, his voice muffled by the mask, but edged with desperation rather than pure rage. "Nobody! You—" He jabbed the gun toward Sarah, Stay where you are. Don't touch anything. Sarah slowly raised her hands, palms open, as if she were reaching up to calm the sky. All right, she said. Okay, just take it easy. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears, but his mind grew strangely calm. This was familiar ground, in a way, terror in enclosed spaces, unpredictable men with guns and shaking hands. He could feel the old training slipping into place, a quiet voice in his head breaking down the situation. Entrance unsecured, civilians scattered, one-armed hostile, unknown intent. But this wasn't a mission. This was his daughter's only refuge from him, and now danger had followed her here. Mia sat frozen in the booth, eyes wide, her breath coming in shallow bursts. She'd never seen a gun this close before, not outside of movies or the rare news clip. This was different. The air felt thick, her ears rang, and the storm outside suddenly seemed far less threatening than the storm standing in the center of the diner, with a weapon leveled carelessly toward everything she knew. Ranger moved without hesitation. He stepped in front of Mia, placing his solid body between her and the gunman, head low, ears pinned back, a low growl unfurling from deep in his chest. His fur bristled along his spine, every muscle ready to spring if Ethan asked, or if the threat crossed an invisible line Ranger had drawn in his mind. The man's eyes snapped to the dog, and for a second, raw fear flashed there. "Call off the dog," he shouted, jerking the gun toward Ranger and Mia. "Get down! All of you, get down!" Ethan's body felt like it moved through heavy water as he stepped out from behind the counter, hands raised slowly to show they were empty. His leg protested every second of it, but he kept going, placing himself deliberately where the gunman had to see him. "Okay," Ethan said, voice low and controlled. "Okay, easy. We're not moving. No one's going to rush you. Just breathe." He met the man's eyes, not challenging, not pleading, assessing. Those eyes were scattered, fracturing under pressure, but they weren't dead. There was no cold, flat emptiness there, no practiced detachment, just panic, just terror. "On your knees!" the gunman yelled suddenly, pointing the weapon directly at Ethan now. "Get down, right now!" Mia's voice cracked out of her before she could stop it. "Dad!" Fear clawed up her throat, hot and suffocating. She wanted to run to him, to grab him, to do something. Anything, but her legs felt nailed to the floor. Ranger's growl deepened, chest vibrating, but he stayed where he was, glancing between Ethan and Mia as if trying to decide which one needed him more. Ethan lowered himself carefully to his knees, one hand braced against a chair to keep from collapsing. The old injury screamed, a sharp reminder of another time he'd gone down under gunfire. He forced the memory back, focusing instead on the man in front of him. Up close, Ethan could see more. The gunman's gloves were too thin for this weather, and his fingers were raw and red, the knuckles chapped. The grip on the gun was all wrong. Too tight, wrist locked, both hands shaking with every heartbeat. A drop of sweat slid from his hairline down to the edge of the mask, despite the cold. Rookie, terrified, not here to kill for the sake of killing. "What do you want?" Ethan asked quietly. "Money? Car? Just tell us." The man flinched, eyes flicking to the register again, then to the door, then to the windows where the storm raged. "I want you to shut up," he snapped, but his voice cracked on the last word. "Just don't talk, don't move. I swear, I'll shoot." Ethan watched the barrel of the gun bob as the man's hands trembled. He thought of all the times he'd seen real killers, eyes flat, movements precise, breathing measured. This was not that. This was someone backed into a corner. Someone who had run out of choices or believed he had. Fear made people dangerous, but it also made them predictable if you knew how to listen. So Ethan listened. To the ragged breaths, the restless shifting of weight, the way the man kept glancing not just at the register, but at the door like he expected someone, or something, to follow him. Behind him, he could sense Mia's terror like a furnace, hot and wild, see it in the way her shoulders trembled and her fingers gripped the edge of the table. He could feel Ranger's focus, vibrating off the dog in waves, waiting for a signal that hadn't come yet. Ethan inhaled slowly, steadying his own heartbeat, letting training and instinct wrap around his fear like armor. This man was dangerous, yes, but he wasn't a ghost from the old battlefields. He wasn't a professional executioner. He was a shaking figure with a gun in a small diner in a small town, in a storm that made the world feel smaller and more hopeless than it really was. And Ethan Walker, even on his knees, could read him. This wasn't a monster. This was a desperate man, one bad decision away from tragedy. The diner felt like the center of a collapsing world, the storm outside pounding against the windows, the lights flickering, the air thick with fear and cold sweat. The masked gunman stood in the middle of it all, breathing hard, his gloved fingers trembling around the handgun. The weapon bobbed dangerously each time his nerves twitched. Ranger remained in front of Mia, muscles coiled, his thick black and tan coat bristling along his spine as a low growl pulsed deep in his chest. He watched everything, the gunman's shifting feet, Ethan kneeling with his hands raised, Mia's trembling shoulders, and even the storm shadows dancing on the glass. He saw danger the way he had been trained to, sharply, instinctively, without hesitation. Mia's heart felt like it might rip through her ribs. Her breath came shallow, catching in her throat as she watched her father kneel on the cold diner floor. The overhead lights cast long shadows across his face, making his jawline appear sharper, the lines around his eyes deeper. Ethan looked older in that moment, but also somehow stronger, steadier than she remembered. She saw the faint tremor in his injured leg, the stiffness in his shoulders, the way he controlled his own fear by locking it away behind those piercing blue eyes. She saw the soldier he had been, buried somewhere beneath the man she had refused to understand. The gunman's panic swelled until the entire diner seemed to vibrate with it. The young couple huddled in the back booth, the woman silently crying into her scarf. The bearded trucker had his hands pressed flat against the table, jaw clenched, his broad shoulders locked in place. Sarah stood frozen behind the counter, her tall, lean frame held stiff by a mix of courage and dread, the silver strands of her hair trembling each time the storm slammed against the window. She didn't speak, but her green eyes flicked between Ethan and the gunman, silently begging for the right miracle. Tyler Hale, who had dropped to the floor behind a booth when the gun first appeared, finally lifted his head. His face, usually colored with smug confidence, had gone pale beneath his mop of brown hair. His lanky frame shook as he peeked over the vinyl seatback, wide-eyed and terrified. And then, because fear makes fools louder, he hissed out a shaky whisper meant only for himself, but loud enough to catch the gunman's attention. "This is insane. Just rob the damn place and go, man." The gunman whipped his head toward Tyler, fury and panic tangling together. "Shut up," he barked, taking one step back and one to the side, the gun shifting dangerously away from Ethan and toward the direction of the voice. Tyler ducked too late. His eyes met the gunman's for a split second, and fear burst from him in a nervous, stupid laugh. The kind that didn't belong in a moment like this. That single laugh shattered the gunman's focus. His grip faltered. His stance shifted. His eyes snapped away from Ethan and Mia and Ranger for just one heartbeat, one fatal heartbeat. Ranger moved like lightning. There was no warning, no bark, no growl, only the explosive surge of muscle as he launched himself forward, his claws skidding across the tile for half a second before his weight propelled him into the gunman's arm. His jaws clamped onto the man's wrist with the precision of years of training, forcing the weapon upward. The gun discharged with a deafening crack, the bullet burying itself harmlessly in a light fixture that shattered into sparks. The gun clattered to the floor, spinning across the tiles. Ethan moved instantly, adrenaline burning through every injury, every ache. He scrambled up from the floor and lunged toward Mia, wrapping his arms around her, pulling her tight against his chest. His big hands shielded her head instinctively, hands that had once steadied rifles and patched wounds, now trembling as they protected the only thing in the world that mattered more than his own life. Mia buried her face into his shoulder, her fingers clutching his jacket. Her lungs shook with a sob she didn't realize she had been holding back. The warmth of his embrace, the firmness of his arms, the scent of cold air and diner coffee, and something familiar, something like home, washed over her all at once. And in that moment, her anger cracked. It cracked wide open. The masked gunman screamed in pain, thrashing wildly, trying to shake Ranger off his arm. The dog held fast, growling, his powerful body twisting to keep the man pinned. He had been trained for situations far worse than this. His movements were precise, controlled, avoiding vital areas even in the chaos. This was not a savage attack. It was a soldier disabling another threat. But to the gunman, who was drowning in fear, it felt like being torn apart. Ethan held Mia tighter, one hand gripping her back, the other shielding her from the fight unfolding only feet away. His breath came in quick bursts, but his eyes stayed sharp, assessing, ready to intervene if Ranger needed him. Every instinct he had honed across continents, deserts, and war zones surged back to the surface. If the man broke free, if he grabbed the gun again, Ethan was prepared to put himself between the danger and his daughter without a second thought. Mia felt his heartbeat against her cheek, fast but steady. Strong, not weak, not broken, not the fading hero she had told herself he was. She pulled back slightly, just enough to see his face. The overhead lights flickered again, illuminating the deep lines of exhaustion, the shadowed stubble along his jaw, and the fierce, unwavering love in his eyes. The realization hit her like the force of a winter wind. He was still the man who had carried her on his shoulders, who had whispered promises of safety during thunderstorms, who had stood between danger and innocence more times than she would ever know. He was still her father, still her protector, still her hero. Her anger melted, soft, quiet, painful in its suddenness, like a snowflake dissolving in the warmth of a hand. Ranger twisted hard, forcing the gunman to the ground with a thud. The man's cries echoed through the diner as the dog held him pinned, chest heaving. Ranger's ears remained pinned back, eyes alert, ready for another attack, even through exhaustion. Then the sirens wailed. Lights flashed red and blue across the snow outside the diner windows. The door burst open and two police officers rushed in, guns drawn, barking orders. Ranger released the gunman immediately, stepping back but keeping himself between Ethan and any new threat. The officers swept in, securing the suspect, cuffing him, reading his rights over his choked breathing. Ethan stood slowly, helping Mia to her feet. Ranger returned to his side, breath heavy, tail low but wagging slightly as if asking, "Did I do well? Are you safe?" Ethan rested a hand on the dog's head. He didn't speak, but Ranger felt the answer. Mia looked at Ranger too, really looked, and for the first time in years, her eyes softened with gratitude. And in that moment, the storm inside their family shifted, just a little. The blizzard had finally spent itself. What remained over Snowridge was a strange, delicate quiet, the kind that follows great storms when the world seems unsure whether to rest or mourn. The sky hung low, a pale blue curtain stretched across fading clouds, and the lights of emergency vehicles splashed red and blue onto the thick layers of fresh snow outside Frostbite Diner. Smoke curled weakly from the broken light fixture inside, the last remnant of the gunshot that could have taken everything but didn't. Mia stood in the open doorway of the diner, her breath shaking as she looked at her father. Ethan Walker was still catching his balance from the adrenaline crash, one hand braced against a table, the other resting protectively on Ranger's head. The overhead glow cast shadows across Ethan's rugged features, the square jaw darkened with stubble, the lines etched by years of harsh sun and harder choices, the icy blue eyes that no longer seemed distant, but vulnerable and raw. For a heartbeat, Mia didn't move. She watched the man she had spent years resenting, the man she believed had chosen war over her, the man she had pretended to no longer need. But now, after seeing him kneel in front of a gun, feeling his arms wrap around her as if the world could shatter, but she would still be safe, everything inside her cracked open. She stepped forward. Her boots sank into the soft snow just outside the door as she crossed the remaining distance between them in 3 trembling strides. Then she threw her arms around him with a force that surprised even herself. Ethan froze for half a second, breath halted, eyes wide, before he wrapped his arms around her just as tightly, burying his face in her hair. For the first time in years, Mia let herself lean into him, not as a child clinging to a parent, but as a young woman finally letting go of the weight she had carried for far too long. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking under the pressure of every unsaid apology. "I'm sorry I pushed you away. I'm sorry I blamed you for everything. I didn't know. I didn't understand." Ethan's breath trembled as he held her, his broad shoulders shaking beneath his weather-worn jacket. "You were right to be angry," he murmured, his voice thick and unsteady. I left too many times. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought protecting the world meant protecting you, but I hurt you instead, and I—" His voice faltered, breaking into silence. When he spoke again, it was barely above a whisper. "I never stopped loving you, not for a second." Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, settling on Mia's hair and Ethan's jacket. Ranger sat at their feet, his breathing still heavy from the fight, but his amber eyes bright and soft. The dog's ears perked as Mia crouched down and wrapped her arms around his thick neck. He nudged his large head against her shoulder, tail thumping in the snow, as if he had been waiting years for this very moment, this silent truce between the two people he loved most. "You saved me," Mia said to Ranger, her voice muffled by his fur. "Both of you saved me." Ranger blinked slowly, leaning his weight against her, accepting the apology she didn't know how to say aloud yet. "I'm sorry I pushed you away too." Ethan watched them, his heart swelling and twisting all at once. The storm outside had passed, but the storm inside him, the guilt, the longing, the fear of losing the one thing he still fought for, finally began to settle. From a distance near the parking lot, Tyler Hale stood watching. The teenager's lanky frame looked smaller than usual, swallowed by his oversized leather jacket. Snow clung to his hair and shoulders, but he didn't seem to feel the cold. His brown eyes, normally sharp with arrogance and mischief, now held only quiet shame. He had always thought strength meant loudness, bravado, fearlessness. But watching Ethan, injured, exhausted, yet standing between a gun and his daughter without hesitation, had struck something deep inside him. Tyler shoved his hands deeper into his pockets, his breath forming small clouds in the air. He knew he had been awful, petty, cruel in that thoughtless way of boys who don't understand the impact of their own words. He knew that what he had witnessed tonight was the kind of courage he had mocked without ever understanding, and though he didn't step forward or speak, not yet, something inside him shifted. A seed of change planted quietly in the cold, waiting for its time. Back near the diner entrance, Ethan pulled Mia close one last time, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You're safe," he whispered. "That's all that matters." She nodded into his chest, tears freezing lightly on her lashes before she wiped them away. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. Ethan's grip tightened, not with the desperation of someone afraid to lose her, but with the steadiness of a father ready to rebuild something fragile and new. Ranger stood between them, tail wagging slowly, proud and content. His breath formed white clouds in the night air as he nudged both of their hands at once, as if insisting they stay close, as if declaring the battle finally over. The snow-covered road stretched ahead of them, glistening under the faint glow of the emergency lights. Ethan looked at Mia. Mia looked at Ranger. And then, without a word, the three of them began walking side by side, leaving behind the wreckage of the night, stepping toward a future no longer defined by hurt or distance. For the first time in years, the cold didn't feel so cold. And Snowridge, wrapped in moonlit snow, felt like a place where healing could finally begin. In the quiet after the storm, when the last sirens faded and the snow settled like a blessing over Snowridge, one truth remained. Miracles don't always arrive with angels or shining light. Sometimes they walk beside us on four paws or stand trembling but brave in the people we love. Ethan, Mia, and Ranger found their way back to each other that night, not because life was easy, but because grace found them in their brokenness. And maybe that's how God works most often, quietly, gently, through the courage we rediscover, the forgiveness we give, and the love we choose again and again, even when it hurts. In our everyday lives, storms will come, arguments, disappointments, losses that bend the heart. But just like the snow melting on a winter morning, healing begins the moment we choose to see each other with new eyes. Sometimes the smallest act of protection, the softest apology, or the loyalty of a faithful companion is the miracle God sends to remind us we are not alone. So wherever you are watching from tonight, may this story remind you that God still moves in quiet ways, still restores what feels broken, still walks with those who feel lost. May He bless you, protect your family, and guide your steps, just as He guided Ethan, Mia, and Ranger through their darkest night. Before you go, let me know in the comments, what miracle, big or small, has touched your life? Share your story, inspire someone who needs hope today. And if this message warmed your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of courage, faith, and the quiet miracles that still walk beside us every day. May God bless you, your home, and everyone you love. Amen.